The former prince, now Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, has officially left Royal Lodge and will live in a home on Sandringham estate in Norfolk. It comes as his brother speaks out on the Epstein scandal for the first time.
A 64-year-old man, a former senior royal, a one-time war hero who once commanded the full pageantry of the British monarchy, standing in front of a 5-bedroom farmhouse.
The palace is now urging Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor to remove himself from the royal line of succession.
King Charles is well known for his views on climate change, and apparently he's now taking steps to make sure that his Sandringham estate is more eco-friendly.
On the night of Monday, the 3rd of February 2026, Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, the man most of us still think of as Prince Andrew, packed what he could, walked out of Royal Lodge for the last time and was driven north through the darkness to the Sandringham estate in Norfolk. He did not leave in daylight. He did not leave with ceremony. He left under the cover of night in a convoy of vehicles that moved quietly through Windsor Great Park while most of Britain slept. By the morning of the 4th of February, the BBC's royal correspondent Daniela Relf confirmed what palace sources had been signalling for months. This is not simply a story about a property dispute. The departure from Royal Lodge was the physical conclusion of a process that had been stripping Andrew of everything that connected him to the institution he was born into, and his title, his residence, his public role, and ultimately his freedom to move as he pleased. And by the time you reach the end of what I am going to tell you today, you will understand something that most of the coverage of this story has completely missed. Something that changes the financial picture of this departure in a way that has barely been reported at all. But there is one detail I need to hold back for now. A detail about what happened exactly 15 days after that night departure. A detail that reframes the entire meaning of the move to Sandringham. I will come to it. But first, you need to understand what Royal Lodge actually was and what it meant to Andrew to be there. Before we go any further, if you find that this channel gives you the kind of careful, unhurried royal coverage that is genuinely hard to find, please take a moment to subscribe and turn on notifications. Royal Lodge sits on the edge of Windsor Great Park in Berkshire, roughly 30 miles west of central London. It is a Grade 2 listed building, which means it carries a formal architectural and historical designation under English heritage law, a recognition that a building is nationally significant and of more than special interest. The grounds alone cover approximately 99 acres. The house itself has 31 rooms. Its walls are red brick with Georgian and Victorian detailing and what architectural historians have described as superb Gothic windows. Andrew approached the Crown Estate about acquiring the lease. The Times of London reported in an investigation published in October 2025 that Andrew paid £1 million for the lease and agreed to fund renovations, estimated at £7.5 million at 2002 prices excluding VAT. In exchange, the lease was structured so that his rent obligation for its duration was, in the words of the official document, one peppercorn if demanded. He was effectively paying in advance rather than making traditional rent payments. The lease ran for 75 years. Andrew was 66 when he left. That means, in purely contractual terms, he had decades of residency still ahead of him when the door closed behind him that February night. Keep that figure, £8.5 million invested, in mind, because it will matter when we reach a financial detail that almost no mainstream outlet has covered properly. The question that most people have been asking about this departure is a simple one: why now? The palace had announced in October 2025 that Andrew would be leaving Royal Lodge at the same moment King Charles stripped him of his remaining titles. So the departure was not a surprise. What was a surprise was the timing and the manner. The original plan, according to sources cited by the BBC in October 2025, was to delay the move until after January 2026 to avoid the embarrassment of Andrew being relocated to Sandringham at Christmas, where the royal family traditionally gathers. That plan held, and then something changed. In late January and early February 2026, the United States Department of Justice released another tranche of documents. From the Jeffrey Epstein files, these were not the first such release, but among the new material were email exchanges showing arrangements made for Andrew's December 2010 stay at Epstein's New York townhouse. a stay that occurred less than 5 months after Epstein had been released from prison following his conviction for soliciting a minor. The emails show that Andrew and his police protection officers had been given a temporary security code to, in the words of the emails themselves, get in and out of the property. This was not new information in the broadest sense. Andrew's December 2010 visit to Epstein had been publicly acknowledged. He had told BBC Newsnight in 2019 that the purpose of the visit was solely to tell Epstein that it was inappropriate for them to be seen together. But the specificity of the newly released emails, the security codes, the logistical arrangements, the clinical precision of the planning, added a layer to the existing picture that proved impossible for the palace to absorb quietly. Within days, Andrew left Royal Lodge. He was photographed on the Monday, the same day as the departure, riding a horse through Windsor Great Park close to Royal Lodge. He was also photographed driving away from Windsor Castle and waving at passers-by. The BBC reported that both sets of images were poorly received by the palace. That is a carefully chosen phrase from an institution not known for emotional transparency. Read between those words. The man was losing everything. His title was gone. His home was going. His reputation was under active scrutiny. And he spent his last day riding horses and waving at people. That specific detail tells you something important about the human being at the centre of this story. Something that I think is worth holding on to. By the morning of the 4th of February 2026, Andrew was at Wood Farm, a cottage on the western edge of the Sandringham estate in Norfolk. Wood Farm is a property with its own royal history, and King George VI stayed there, and it was the favourite retreat of the late Prince Philip in his final years. But it is modest by the standards of where Andrew had been living. According to the BBC's reporting confirmed on the 4th of February, Wood Farm was always intended as a temporary residence, while his permanent home, Marsh Farm, also on the Sandringham estate, underwent renovations. And for a brief moment, from that February morning, with Andrew safely installed in Norfolk and Royal Lodge finally vacated, it seemed as though the property chapter of this story was closed. The palace had managed the situation, the former prince was gone, the 31-room mansion was empty. The next chapter could begin. That is what it looked like on the surface. But what nobody had yet accounted for was what happened on the morning of the 19th of February 2026. If you have stayed with me this far, I think you already know that this channel takes these stories seriously. Please subscribe if you have not already. Now, because what comes next is the detail that reframes everything we have discussed so far. The 19th of February 2026 was Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor's 66th birthday, and on that morning, Thames Valley Police and Metropolitan Police officers arrived at the Sandringham estate and arrested him on suspicion of misconduct in public office. He was taken into custody and spent approximately 11 hours in police detention before being released without charge. The investigation, as of the time of writing this script, remains active. No charges have been filed. Andrew has consistently denied any wrongdoing. The specific allegation under investigation, according to reporting by PBS NewsHour, CNN, and the New York Times on the day of the arrest, relates to whether Andrew sent confidential government documents to Jeffrey Epstein. The phrase misconduct in public office is a specific charge under English common law. It applies to a public officer and a working member of the royal family holds a public role who willfully neglects their duty or engages in conduct that amounts to an abuse of the public's trust. The charge carries a potential maximum sentence of life imprisonment, though such a maximum is rarely applied. Andrew has not been charged. He has not been found guilty of anything, but the arrest itself, on his birthday, at the estate to which he had been moved 15 days earlier, is the detail that changes the meaning of everything that came before it. The departure from Royal Lodge was presented by the palace, by the media, and by Andrew's own behaviour on that final Monday as a resolution. He was leaving. The matter was settled. The lodge would be dealt with. Norfolk would be quieter. And then, 15 days later, the estate that was meant to keep him out of the public eye became the address where he was arrested. Not wrong assumption. Not a clean resolution. The correct reality is this. The move to Sandringham did not conclude Andrew's story. It simply relocated it. And what that means for the institution, for the palace, and for King Charles and For the broader question of how a modern monarchy manages a member of the family who has become genuinely untouchable in the public sense, is the question that now sits at the heart of everything. There are 3 reasons why this departure happened in the way that it did, and none of them are the one most people assume. The most common assumption is that this was primarily about Andrew's Epstein connection, that the new documents released in February 2026 forced the palace's hand. That is partly true, but it is the least important of the 3 forces at work here. The first reason is institutional reputation management, and it operates on a timeline that predates the February 2026 Epstein documents by several years. Andrew's position at Royal Lodge had become, to use the description offered by the BBC's royal correspondent Daniela Relf in her February 2026 reporting, symbolic of the wider problems his relationship with Epstein has caused. The property itself had become a symbol of privilege unchecked, of an institution unwilling to act on its own stated values, of a man who had settled a civil case brought by Virginia Giuffre in February 2022 for a reported £12 million, and then continued living in a 31-room mansion at what amounted to no ongoing cost. The Crown Estate's own reporting confirmed that Andrew had not made a traditional rent payment in 20 years. The peppercorn lease arrangement, entirely legal and properly documented, had nonetheless become something the palace could no longer defend publicly. The October 2025 decision to strip Andrew's titles and announce the lodge departure was not a reaction to one event. It was the conclusion of a years-long internal process of determining how much institutional damage could be absorbed before action became unavoidable. The second reason is the direct pressure applied by Prince William, who, as the Prince of Wales and heir to the throne, has a clear institutional interest in how the monarchy presents itself to the public, The Sun's reporting, corroborated by royal commentator sources, noted that William had a deeply personal motivation for wanting Andrew removed from Royal Lodge. A motivation connected to the physical proximity of the lodge to the properties where William and his family live and work within Windsor Great Park. And this is where a detail from October 2025 becomes significant. When Andrew surrendered the Royal Lodge lease, William and Catherine moved from Adelaide Cottage, at their previous home within Windsor Great Park, to Forest Lodge, a larger property. The departures and arrivals were timed together. Adelaide Cottage, William and Catherine's previous home, was freed up at the same moment Royal Lodge was being vacated. The timing was not accidental. The Guardian reported in October 2025 that King Charles had long wanted Andrew to move to more modest accommodation. The palace, as a BBC source put it in October 2025, had chosen to prioritise the monarchy over family ties. The third reason is financial, and it is the most specific and the least reported. When Andrew surrendered his lease on Royal Lodge, the original lease agreement included a clause that, under certain conditions, entitled him to compensation for early surrender. According to reporting by InStyle and confirmed by Crown Estate documentation cited in a Facebook post from the InStyle account dated the 9th of March 2026, that compensation figure was £558,000. Provided the surrender occurred before August 2026, he left in February 2026. On paper, that clause should have applied. And yet the Crown Estate's own report for Parliament's public spending watchdog stated plainly that the property was in such a state of disrepair that in the Crown Estate's assessment, Andrew would in all likelihood not be owed any compensation. He invested £8.5 million. He received nothing in return. That matters, and here is why. It is the detail that tells you how completely the institutional calculus shifted. A man who entered a 75-year lease with the financial confidence of a working royal exited it 23 years later with no title, no compensation, and no right of return. And there is one more piece of this story that, as of the time of writing, has received almost no mainstream attention, and I want to bring it to you now, because it matters more than most of what has been reported. This is the part that most coverage has missed. On the 4th of March 2026, People magazine reported that Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor had been asked to surrender the lease on a second Crown Estate property, East Lodge, a Grade 2 listed thatched cottage near Windsor that he had rented since 1998. The lease on East Lodge was not due to expire until July 2027. He had rented it for 28 years. It was a smaller property than Royal Lodge, but it represented something significant, a physical foothold within the Windsor estate, a place that still connected him, geographically and symbolically, to the institution from which he had been removed. The Times of London, reporting on the 3rd of March 2026, confirmed that Andrew had told the Crown Estate he would surrender that lease. By early March 2026, therefore, Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor had relinquished every Crown Estate property he had ever held. Royal Lodge, East Lodge, both gone. The only property remaining to him is Marsh Farm, a 5-bedroom farmhouse on the Sandringham estate owned privately by King Charles, funded and maintained by the King from his own resources. Andrew no longer holds a single lease. He lives entirely at the discretion of his brother. That is the detail that mainstream coverage has glossed over, not the departure from Royal Lodge, which was dramatic and widely reported, but the East Lodge surrender 3 weeks later, and what it means. Andrew's connection to any property he could call his own, in any legal sense, is now zero. He lives in a house he does not own, on an estate he does not control, at the grace of a brother who has demonstrated very clearly that institutional duty now takes precedence over familial loyalty. Now, I want to think with you about what might come next. There are 3 possibilities, each grounded in what we know from precedent and from the named sources who have been covering this story. The first possibility is that the police investigation concludes without charges and Andrew's life at Marsh Farm settles into a kind of permanent, quiet semi-exile. This is, in fact, the most historically precedented outcome for a senior royal in difficulty. The institution has a long history of managing its problematic members through physical removal and strategic silence rather than through formal legal action. Marsh Farm, boggy remote, 50 miles from Windsor, nearly 2 hours from London, is designed for invisibility. Robert Jobson, author of The Windsor Legacy, published in 2025, described Marsh Farm as not finished yet, a bit of a shell. The renovation, reported by The Express on the 13th of March 2026, to include the installation of Sky television and a new security gate, is not the renovation of a man being prepared for any kind of public return. It is the renovation of a permanent retreat. The second possibility is that charges are filed. The investigation remains active. Thames Valley Police confirmed the arrest on the 19th of February 2026, and no timeline for a conclusion has been given publicly. If charges are filed, the constitutional implications are significant. A former senior member of the royal family facing a criminal trial would require Parliament to consider formally Andrew's position in the line of succession, a question the BBC reported the government was considering in February 2026, with a source noting the government had no current plans to introduce legislation but was not ruling it out. But the House of Commons Library published a research briefing on the removal of titles and honours on the 12th of March 2026, which detailed the formal processes already set in motion in October 2025. A criminal trial would accelerate those considerations considerably. The third possibility is the one that receives the least attention but carries the most long-term significance. People magazine, reporting on the 4th of March 2026, noted that Sarah Ferguson's whereabouts had not been publicly confirmed since December 2025 and that she was believed to be abroad. Ferguson and Andrew divorced in 1996 but have maintained an extraordinarily close relationship. They shared Royal Lodge, they raised their daughters together, and by all accounts, they have remained genuine companions through everything. If Ferguson does not return to the United Kingdom, if the combination of Andrew's legal situation and her own complex relationship with the institution makes a return untenable, then Andrew's life at Marsh Farm becomes a solitary exile in a way that no renovation, no satellite television installation, and no new security gate can address. The house may be prepared, but a house is not the same as a home. And this brings us in the end back to where we started. If this kind of storytelling matters to you, patient, detailed, and always respectful of the people at the centre of these stories, please subscribe and share this video with someone who you think would appreciate it. It genuinely helps this channel continue doing exactly this kind of work. This is not a story about a property dispute. At its heart, it is a story about identity, about what we use to tell ourselves and others who we are and what happens when those external markers are removed one by one. Andrew spent over 50 years as a Prince of the United Kingdom. He was the Queen's favourite son, according to multiple royal biographers, including Robert Hardman in his 2022 biography, Queen of Our Times. He served as a helicopter pilot in the Falklands War in 1982. A genuine act of service that briefly made him a figure of national pride. He had 2 daughters he loves. He had a home that connected him physically and historically to the institution that shaped everything about him. And then, across a period of roughly 6 months, from October 2025 through to March 2026, all of that was systematically removed. The titles, the lodge, the East Lodge, the compensation he might reasonably have expected, the public role. And then, on his 66th birthday, the police arrived at his door. The people watching this who have lived long enough to understand that a person is not the sum of their possessions, that dignity is not a function of address, and that what matters in the end is what we were to the people closest to us. Those are the viewers I'm thinking of as I close this story today. You have stayed with me through every detail of this because you understand, as I do, that behind the titles and the property negotiations and the legal terminology, there is a human being navigating the most comprehensive loss imaginable. King Charles funded the move to Sandringham. He is paying for the renovation of Marsh Farm. He did not visit Andrew when he was at Sandringham for Christmas. He drove past Wood Farm twice during his mid-March 2026 stay on the estate, according to reporting by the Daily Mail, and did not stop. 2 brothers, 2 miles apart. And the question I would like you to sit with, but the question that I genuinely do not have an answer to, and I do not think anyone does, is this: at what point does institutional responsibility end and the older, simpler obligation of one brother to another begin? I would love to know what you think. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I read every one of them, and the conversation you start there is always worth having.